Um, but this is informal. You can just, we can just chat about whatever you'd like to chat about. I know there's some, um, you know, uh, ndau related topics, but we can talk about, bigger picture stuff around crypto as well, and just keep it fun.
All
But I
right.
want to, you know,
Cool.
cover
Sounds
topics.
good. So let's get started. Guys, if you guys have not seen our last interview with John from the Oniero team, I think you guys should all go and check it out. But if you have not met John, please take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our guests that are going to be listening in on YouTube, whether now or in the future.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. This is great. Thanks for having me. Well, my name is Jon Lester. My online handle is Pathfinder, so I'm Pathfinder on Twitter and Discord and various other places. But I'm currently the VP of operations at Onero, and I've been working with Onero for about 5 years now. And Onero is the engineering team that has been the core developers for the open source ndau project. So Onero is the engineering team that was hired by the Axiom Foundation to develop the core code for ndau and also maintain initially the validator nodes. Right when it was just Onero running them, not the case anymore. Most of the validator nodes now are run by third-party people, decentralized, right? And I've been, my focus is on really on the engineering side of things, as well as some of the community development as well. And so my background, though, is actually I've been involved in crypto since probably around 2013. I was an early interested in Bitcoin, really from the perspective of how to make better money. How to not how to make more money, but how to make better money. How do you how to how to create a digital currency that is more transparent and egalitarian and decentralized. And yeah, before that, my background is in healthcare. I worked in the neurology service at Massachusetts General Hospital for many years, and over time, I got more interested in computing technology and how it could be applied to helping connect patients with each other to share experiences in a decentralized way. You catching a theme here? This is my theme, right? It's like decentralized, communities connecting with each other and peer-to-peer communication, disintermediation, removing intermediaries, right? But I started working with I started doing other types of engineering work over the years, different software companies. I was one of the people who created the virtual world Second Life back in the day, the first metaverse, really, I think. We created that back in the day, so online communities, virtual environments, and I got involved in ndau because back before it was created, when it was being designed, and I was talking to some people who were working with Onero, were working for Onero too, and I'm very much a product-minded person. So if I had to sort of put myself in a bucket, I would put myself into, thinking about product design, product uh, development, product, shipping products, things like that. And it's really about finding the right product market fit. And I really believe that, with cryptocurrencies, there's no single one to rule them all. I think each of them has a very unique, not all of them, but the good ones have very specific use cases, very clear, what is special about them. And what I really loved about ndau was this idea of a of an adaptive currency that's aware. I almost said self-aware because I got AI on the brain recently because AI is everywhere. It's not self-aware; it's aware of market conditions, and it can adapt to market conditions, and it can change the incentives and disincentives around all of that. And also and at the core of it all, end up being very focused on obviously self-sovereignty, right? The idea that you can earn yields, which is great, just by holding it in your wallet app, and you don't have to rely on any custodial service or any other person or legal entity or an exchange like FTX to hold it for you. So yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you for that awesome introduction, and you touched on a few key points that I definitely would like to discuss a little bit. You were talking a little bit about Onero being the first initial validators and the engineers of the ndau protocol, and I wanted to actually expand a little bit more about node operators, because I know that it's important that ndau remain and further develop its decentralization, its robustness, and its security. So I personally, it's kind of selfish as well. I've accumulated now a little over 1,000 ndau with the intention of trying to validate my own ndau node. Now, I know as someone who hasn't gone through and taken any type of data science classes, what can I do to hone my skills, or what should I be looking up online, or kind of classes should I be taking, so that I can have a general understanding of how to operate a node, and what are the basics that I would need to operate a node as a complete layman or beginner when it comes to operating a computer, and what are the basics that I would need beyond the 1,000 ndau that I currently have?
That's a good question. And for those people who are listening who may not be familiar what nodes are and validator nodes are, ndau is a proof of stake cryptocurrency, right? So it's not a proof of work cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, where miners, people who are mining Bitcoin or any other proof of work coin, are the ones who are actually securing the network and adding transactions to the blockchain. And I think proof of work is great. I even have I always point to this. I always have an old S7 Antminer back there that used to be mining Bitcoin way back in the day, but it's no longer profitable at all. But the way proof of work works is the proof of stake works is by the node is the network is secured by people running validator nodes, which are nodes that are actually validating transactions and adding them to the blockchain. And the way validator nodes work, because this is proof of stake, to run a validator node, you have to take a minimum of 1,000 ndau and basically lock it up into this node. And that's basically putting your skin in the game. It's like, hey, I believe in this. I'm going to lock up this ndau, you can unlock it eventually. But it's basically showing that someone has a desire to be a good actor in the ecosystem. Because if you do something bad, you can actually the node operator, that initial stake ndau can be slashed. They could lose it, right? If they do something, but they have to do something deliberately bad. It's not like you don't have to worry about, if I accidentally do something wrong, I could lose it. It's like, no, it's actually like you have to have you have to do something deliberately bad. And who decides that? Well, it's the BPC DAO decides that, basically, right? So but validator nodes are what run the blockchain. When people ask, what is the ndau blockchain? The ndau blockchain is all of the validator nodes working together. And in general, the more validators you have, the more validator nodes you have, and the more diverse, and by diverse I mean like run by different groups of people and maybe even geographically different locations. The more diverse, the better, and the more decentralized, the better, right? And when ndau was first created, kind of like when Bitcoin was first created, it was just like it was Satoshi mining Bitcoin. That was it, one dude, right? And he had to do it himself, and then then it grew. And again, with proof of stake, it's with the way the nodes work is it's about spinning up a validator node. And initially, Onero ran the core 5 validator nodes, and over time, what's happened is that now we have maybe like 15, I think, total. validator nodes running, and all of the ones beyond ours are run by other people. And what happens is you have to incentivize people. Okay, so why would I run a validator node? It's like, well, because then you can get node rewards based on, if you have, based on how much you have staked. So the more ndau that you basically put in as skin in the game, showing your commitment, the more ndau that you put in, the higher your chances are of winning once a day a reward, a node operator reward, right? And that reward right now is it's a few hundred ndau actually. So it's like, oh, that's a pretty good chunk, and it changes based on how much EAI is being earned. But the thing that I would say though, so the good news is if you go to ndau.io/nodes, you will be dropped into the knowledge base that walks you through the whole process and explaining like what is a validator node, and also a verifier node is something that you can run for free. So anyone can run a verifier node, but you're not going to be potentially winning any node rewards. But then the path is you set up a verifier node first, get that up and running and feel comfortable with it. And then you can basically optionally upgrade it to become a validator node, which is then involving you taking, the 1,000 ndau minimum and locking it into the node and doing all that good stuff. But now one thing that and this is similar to other proof of stake situations, right? So for example, if you're like, hey, I've heard a lot about Ethereum. I'd like to run an Ethereum node. It's pretty technically demand, like you have to be kind of, it's not just push a button and run a node, right?
Yeah.
Because it typically involves a lot of things with the Unix command line and working with and being somewhat familiar with GitHub, right? But also being even more familiar with just sort of generally managing Unix based systems. Like if you're a Unix system sysop or a system manager, then you can get your head around it pretty quick. So while we are spending a lot of time, what we want to do is make running validator nodes easier for people, right? At the same time, there are levels of complexity that you just can't make it just a one button operation. It's kind of like saying, you couldn't fly a plane with just one button. Like it has to be a little complex because it's a complicated thing that you're managing. But the good news is if you go to ndau.io/nodes, it really walks you through basically like a recipe of how to set this up. Okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. So I would tell somebody who's interested in running a node to become familiar with really three things, right? One is Unix. Right. You're going to be doing command line things. You're going to be like, like Mr. Robot. You're going to be typing Unix commands, and you don't have to know everything about Unix, but you have to be you have to be like, okay, command line. I know what that is. Here's the prompt, and I can type in all these different commands. And, it's not going to be a graphical user interface. It's going to be command line, Unix command line stuff, right? So there's that. And the second thing is GitHub. Just becoming generally familiar around how GitHub works. How do code repositories work? How do you pull, how do you, grab something from a repository or a repo, as they call it in GitHub, grab a repo and, because the node software is on GitHub, like all of the ndau softwares, because all of this is open source and it's all on a public GitHub. So you're going to be pulling software down with GitHub and getting it installed on your local machine and configuring things. And on the command line, configuring things always involves like editing text files, right? That's the way Unix works. So getting a little familiar with GitHub as well. And the third thing really is, remember, this is going to have to run somewhere. Right. This is going to have to run on a machine, and if you want your validator node to be functioning well, and if it's functioning well and it's up all the time, then that increases its chances of winning node rewards. You want to make sure it's a stable machine. You don't want to be running it on a dusty computer in the corner that the cat knocks over every once in a while or unplugs. Right. It's like, it should be a little more reliable. And although it's kind of cool to run it on any kind of other hardware, and we actually have one of our engineers actually got a validator node running on a Raspberry Pi, right? Which is, those tiny little super cheap computers. He had to do a lot of kind of hacking to get it to do that, but he did. He's got it. One of the validator nodes on the network right now is a Raspberry Pi. I won't tell you which one, but it's we're running it as a test node. So you want to run it though on something reliable, and the simplest way to run something reliably, like 24/7, with enough horsepower to do whatever it needs to do, is using AWS, so Amazon's services for cloud hosting, right? So with AWS, if you sign up for an AWS account, you basically are paying Amazon to host in the cloud a server that you connect to and you interface with using the Unix command line. You basically, SSH, that's a secure terminal, a secure command line terminal, log into your node, and it's sitting up on Amazon's cloud. And Amazon makes sure there's no power outages, there's no, it stays up all the time. So really those three things, getting just comfortable with Unix in general. You don't have to become a Unix expert. I'm not saying that at all, but you do have to become a little familiar with Unix, like the basics of Unix, the basics of GitHub. And I would recommend running a node on AWS for maximum reliability. If you want to do the extra credit, then it's like, hey, I can install Ubuntu Linux because all this stuff runs on Unix, right? Different flavors. Well, I can install a free version of Ubuntu on an old laptop that I have, and maybe I can try spinning up my validator node like that. And I say, go for it if you feel comfortable doing that. But remember that what your goal is as a validator node operator is maximum reliability and maximum uptime.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. That's really helpful. So I'm just going to clarify so I understand, and anyone that might be interested in running a node understands some of the three basics if you have no technical prowess like myself. So you want to learn the basics of Unix. That's number one. Number two, you want to learn the basics of GitHub, how to navigate through the ndau code that's posted there. And number three is you need to have a reliable machine that can, run the node. And for a beginner like myself, it's way easier or more recommended to have something like an AWS, Amazon Web Services. So those are three things I'm going to make sure that I take physical note of. And I have started looking online. There's quite a few YouTube educators that will actually put out a lot of these basics for free. So I've been learning about different things. I've been learning a little bit about AWS online already. So now if I can tackle the other two, I might have a general understanding of how to operate a node. So thank you for that, John. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. The last thing I will say though is, you don't have to become an AWS expert. Like the thing is, AWS is very complex. I know people like that's their job is AWS expert. Like you can go down a whole rabbit hole with that. You don't need to do that. You do need to become familiar with it. And the same with Unix. You don't have to become like a Unix guru. But you have to you have to be familiar with, okay, I know what a shell script is. I know how to edit a text file in Unix. I know how to use a Pico editor or something, something powerful but not too complicated, right? And again, always remember, the thing is, you can set up a verifier node without any ndau. You can just spin up a verifier node. And if you can do that, if you can get a verifier node spun up, then the path of going from verifier node to validator node is very simple. It really is. So it's just that, it involves, taking 1,000 ndau minimum and staking it there. And the other thing I would make sure too is to understand, and if you go to ndau.io/nodes, there's a link section called ndau guide. I'm looking at it right now. Understanding validator node operations and rewards. And it's if I do say so myself because I wrote it, it's a good article. It's a good article that summarizes like all of the details, and sometimes, it goes into very, very specific details, like how do you win? How are node rewards given? What are the node rewards distribution? How does it work? And what are the do's and the don'ts? And how much can I expect to earn? And it's interesting. I need to update the numbers because I just realized the current node reward values. I have it from October of 2021, and that was back when it was 200 ndau. Because now it's like 300 ndau. You could potentially win. Every 24 hours, 200 ndau, about 300 ndau is awarded to one node. Right. It's the same way like with proof of work, right? Where one miner mines the block and one
Yeah.
miner wins the 6 point some odd Bitcoin right now, 6.15, right? And it's the same thing. So I think it's a fun thing because as somebody who I won't tell you how many different nodes I have running in my house for all other kinds of blockchains. I have a Bitcoin node, I have a Monero node, I have Ravencoin nodes, all these other open source node projects that I run with in my spare time for hobbies. But it's really fun to even if you're not doing a validator node, even if you're not doing it to earn ndau, but just running a verifier node, that you are actually contributing to the network. You're helping to route transactions around. You're not actually adding transactions to the blockchain, but a verifier node still is helping the network. And it makes you realize that with ndau, we always say ndau is like it's like Bitcoin. It's an open source project. There are different people contributing to the code, and everyone, with ndau, anyone who's, we're all part of the ndau collective. Anyone who's holding ndau, anybody who's running a node is part of this collective. And when you run a node, that really kind of sinks in because it's like, ooh, I'm not just holding ndau in my wallet. I'm actually part of a network, part of the network of the blockchain, and that's a really cool feeling, because there's not a lot in this is the beauty of decentralized projects, right? Like where everybody, what is ndau? Ndau is all of us, everyone involved in all these different, in all these different ways. Even then the non-programming ways too, like people who are making just, people who are just creating video. The word is, I don't mean just by, in a pejorative way. It's like if someone is focusing on one thing, like creating videos, then they're part of the ndau collective. They're part of the educational part of all this system, this network, which is critical, because you can have the greatest thing in the world, but if no one knows about it, then what's the point, right? So everyone is adding to this, but when you run a node, like there's all of a sudden you realize, ooh, I'm responsible for this thing that's actually part of this network of transactions and interconnections, around the world. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think so too, and it's something that I'm gonna make a priority for myself is to be able to not only educate people on the projects that I like, including ndau, but to be able to help in securing the blockchain and securing and putting transactions onto the chain. I think that's pretty exciting, interesting to learn about. So much appreciated, and thank you for giving a little background on some of the information where you can find it. So I would have to agree that a lot of the articles that I've come across, read, and researched are very thorough on the ndau.io website. So if you guys want to get more information, you should definitely go there. So John, on the subject of nodes, this is a little bit of the news that I've been hearing about from different crypto pundits online. I guess Gary Gensler from the SEC, he made a statement that he believes proof of stake coins are deemed, or he believes that they are securities. Now, I don't agree with that, but I'm not also deemed, or I don't have a law degree or anything like that. I'm not a securities lawyer, and I'm only just my basic understanding of how blockchains operate. I just think proof of stake is just another novel way of securing a blockchain. So I think it's really exciting and interesting to me. But do you have any comments about Gary Gensler's statements? Are they misplaced?
Well, let's just say Gensler is part of the SEC, right? Government agency in the United States. Remember too, I'm in Canada. Yeah, so, but it's an international, ndau is international, right? Um, but the SEC is in the a U.S. government agency, but there's also a government agency called the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which decides legally what's a commodity. Things like potatoes, and wheat, pork bellies, right? The CFTC says things like Ethereum are commodities, right? They don't agree with the SEC. So if two government agencies, one responsible for securities, one responsible for commodities, can't agree what a thing is, I think, to be honest, I mean, I think the SEC is just they're just not clear on helping define what a security is. When companies like Coinbase, for example, ask them um, um, for clarity, they just don't say anything. So it's really, I think it's a period of time right now. We're in a period of time right now where the government agencies in the United States are, because in Canada we've figured this out. I'm actually a U.S. citizen. I'm not a Canadian by birth, but in Canada, cryptocurrency and things like Ethereum, like they're commodities. They're treated as commodities. End of story. But the whole securities discussion around things like any proof of stake, is a security. The government's just in the United States has to get their act together. And by government, I mean the SEC has to get its act together, but the whole government, they have to agree on what things are. And I think, and they have to work with industry, because that's how you get innovation, right? Because, unfortunately, the situation right now is basically, with Coinbase, it's like the SEC goes to Coinbase and goes, yeah, you've got some securities, watch out. You got securities on it. And then Coinbase goes, okay, which ones are securities? And the SEC goes, we're not going to tell you. And then Coinbase asks, can you help us define what a security is? And the SEC is like, no. so it's really frustrating, I think, for anybody who's trying to, any company is trying to do the right thing. With ndau, we were very clear from the beginning about it, not how it's not a security. And we've had, we've when we were designing it, when Oniero was designing it, we talked to lawyers and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, you're being very clear. It's decentralized. And over time, ndau's always been decentralized. It's become even more decentralized. Like most recently with the Blockchain Policy Council DAO. It's like, okay, now there's a DAO. There's a real DAO. Okay. And the code is all open source, and there was no pre-sale, and there was no, everything was issued on a curve, right? It's there's no ICO for the ndau. All of these things are like, yeah, that's not a security at all. That's like, it's like Ethereum. So I think I think we just need to get clarity from from the U.S. government around this, because if they don't give clarity, the thing to remember is the U.S. is not going to kill any of this innovation. They are just going to push it outside of the U.S., right? And already Coinbase is looking to, internationally to set up, corporate structures outside of the United States, so they can do whatever they're going to. So they can work in environments that have a more sane regulatory environment that will clearly helps you define the rules of the road, right? It's like, oh, okay, just here are the laws, and here's how you define this and that. And so, I have confidence that the U.S. will sort things out. I think a lot of this is how do they say, like saber rattling. It's like, and then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, they're gonna get their act together. But it is unfortunate, just because it has in general, it has a chilling effect on innovation, because people who are, say, like starting from scratch, starting up something new, ndau's been around a long time, and we have clear track record of being very clearly, not a security and all that. But like somebody starting up something new, they'll be like, oh, okay, I'm not going to do it in the U.S. at all. I'm just going to do this whole thing outside of the United States. And again, the world is a lot bigger than just the United States, and the biggest exchange on the planet is Binance. Centralized exchange is Binance, that operates completely outside of U.S. jurisdiction. Not Binance.us, but Binance, the international organization. So I think there's a lot of fear and confusion. And I think it's good to follow like what Coinbase is doing and what they're saying, because I think if you follow Coinbase on Twitter and you follow Armstrong when he's posting on Twitter and such, the the uh, the show is not over. There's no like, oh, Ethereum's a security. All proof of stake is a security. It's not. And really, you summed it up very best at the beginning of this, saying it's like just another innovative way of securing a decentralized blockchain. Proof of work, proof of stake. And I think over time, this will get sorted out. But the first thing the U.S. government has to do is make sure that these two different agencies that are both operating at the same level, and the SEC, the CFTC, get them to kind of get their act together and kind of like, hey, CFTC has already decided this is a commodity. What are you doing over here, SEC?
Yeah. Well, I thank you for that insight, and I have to agree on many of the statements that you made there. I appreciate you touching on that subject. So, another kind of macro subject I want to touch on, based on we're in the middle of March right now. We're approaching the end of March, and within the past couple of weeks, we had a lot of turbulence in the banking sector. So there were 3 banks in the U.S. and then even one in I think Swiss that had to either shutter their doors or close entirely. And then we have the Fed and the Treasury stepping in to backstop a few of these banks. I'm talking about Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and there's another bank. I think forgetting the name right now, Silvergate or Signature, one of those that I forgot to mention now. Basically, these banks had a time mismatch. For people that haven't been studying or aren't up to date on this, but this is just a sign that potentially our banks are a lot more unstable than people realize. And people have been flocking to crypto, it seems like, because the price of Bitcoin and other assets have been skyrocketing as people maybe want to get their money hedged out of this fiat system. So do you have any insight or any opinions on what's been going on?
Well, I think and I've said this I've summarized it the same way before, but this past year has been the year of centralized failures, right? Banks are centralized organizations, institutions. They make decisions centrally. Their decisions are often not transparent. Their balance sheets are sure as heck not transparent, right? So they're really like the opposite. They are the opposite of crypto. You've got things happening in secret, and they're making these centralized decisions. Just one, a group of people behind closed doors going, yeah, let's do this. And really what we've seen with banking is exactly what you said, I believe, is that how fragile the system is, and how all it takes are just a few variables to set it out of whack. All it takes is, a change in interest rates, which affect bonds, and then all of a sudden, all of the banks that are holding all these bonds, then they're suddenly underwater. And so they don't have, like, they've suddenly got big holes in their balance sheets, and also just the general nature of, even when banks are working well, right? The whole concept of fractional reserve banking. Did you know that your money is not actually in a vault in a bank? As soon as your money gets given to a bank, they lend it out to someone else. And in fact, they lend out more money than they actually have. This is how money printing happens. They give out loans for money that doesn't exist, that is just pulled into existence by making a loan. And so the bottom line is really, I think, in general, people have realized how banking how it works, both when it's working well and when it's not working well. Like when things, when there's a run on the bank, right? When everyone wants to take their money out, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we don't have any more money. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, you don't have any more money. And the other thing too is people realizing that, and also I think people are starting to, see very clearly things like, legally, your money, when you give your money to a bank, it's not your money anymore. You are an unsecured creditor to the bank. You are legally making a loan to the bank. So it's not your money anymore. They can do whatever they want. They can prevent you from getting it, all kinds of things. So they don't have to tell you where it is, they're supposed to repay you the loan eventually, but you're an unsecured creditor, which means like there's no collateral. Like you don't have anything from the bank that you're holding on to. Like, the bank's going to give you like, their, one of their offices, and you can hold on to that. And if they default, then you can keep the office or whatever. No, it's unsecured. There's no collateral. So, so I think it's really, I think people are realizing that so much of what the banking system is propped up on is really this is sentiment, right? It's emotions. It's like if people believe in it enough, then it'll be okay. If people will believe that it's safe, then it'll be safe. And I think that can be a really dangerous thing when it's sentiment on top of a centralized, non-transparent system. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue that sentiment drives crypto as well, too. But crypto is very transparent. Everyone understands how these blockchains work. They understand the idea of like how much Bitcoin is there. This is how much Bitcoin is there. Then you know exactly what the ledgers are public. For all these blockchains. And the balances and things like that. The privacy coins aside, but it's things like ndau too. It's when someone asks like how much ndau is in that account, it's like, well, anyone can look at it. How many accounts are holding more than a certain amount of ndau? Well, anyone can look at that. Anyone could query the blockchain and just see, boom, there you go. So I think it's unfortunately the thing is banks are trying to catch up to the sort of modern waves of finance that are washing over the entire planet right now. But I think what's the good news is really none of this has anything to do with a failure of crypto at all. People were saying like, oh, this bank failed because something to do with crypto. It's like, no, it's all FTX failed, nothing to do with crypto. FTX isn't a bank, but it was another example of centralized failure. They were running it like a really badly run bank, basically. And I think the good news is it's making people look at options. It's making people go, maybe I'm going to look into this, and the top of the list is always Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin is the oldest crypto around, and everyone, when everyone starts their crypto journey, they begin with Bitcoin, right? Which is why Bitcoin is the one that's starting to take off first, and then everything else, that rising tide lifts all boats. Then people discover other digital financial instruments, like Ethereum, like ndau, like others, and that comes, as a rise later. So I think at the end of the day, it's a scary time for people, and it's you got to hope that the banks can kind of get their act together without further tanking anything, because the thing is when there's this contagion effect. So when one bank goes, then there's this contagion effect. Other banks get shaky. This gets shaky. Trust is people lose trust. And the bottom line is like when banks fail, then people lose their savings, they lose their homes, they lose everything, because we, as a society, we depend on banks still for a lot of things. In the future, maybe not, but for now, right? And so I think, and you said something earlier that was very good. You said about diversifying. It's all, people should look at options. They should look at more than just, I've got all my money in this one bank.
Yeah.
And I think that's I hope more people are doing that, because I think it's hard when there's fear, when there's a cloud of fear over you. It's hard to think rationally, right? Fear is the mind killer. It makes you just kind of either freeze up, ignore things, or make bad decisions really rashly, And so I think the trick is for everyone to, focus on not being afraid and really just think things through and think about exploring different options for managing your assets, because what's happening right now it's not like over. There's going to be more like things happening as before the dust settles.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I appreciate that insight. And I have a maybe about another 5 minutes myself, so I wanted to actually highlight an event that's coming up. I think there's an ndau webinar that's coming up on, is it April 6th? Is that right?
Yes, April 6th. I can't remember the exact time, but it was sent out. We're going to post it in the Telegram, and we're going to tweet about it again too. But it was sent out to everyone who subscribes to the ndau newsletter, and it is April 6th. Yes, it's a webinar that's going to be basically a sort of update of what's going on with ndau from Onero's perspective, and so talking about like what happened in the past year, what's being worked on now and in the future. We have some cool new stuff we'll be showing. Can't talk about it, but we'll see it on the 6th though.
All right, awesome. Well, I definitely look forward to that. I'm already registered, and I will be sure to have a link down below for the registration webinar as well. I do have that in my email.
Awesome.
So, John, thank you so much for your time. I know we touched a little bit on operating nodes, a little bit of macro, and I really appreciate all of your insight, and thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
No, my pleasure. Thanks, Chris. And it's a wrap. so, I'll just stop the recording.